and welcome to the Idea People podcast. I'm Stephanie Graves, the CEO of Leanders Group. Leanders Group is a full-service PR agency focusing on strategic communications, marketing, and outreach. I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's conversation. Now, let me hand it over to our fantastic host, Rick Garcia.
Welcome to the Idea People, the podcast where we explore innovation, leadership, and transformative ideas with the people who make them happen. I'm your host, Rick Garcia, and today we have an extraordinary guest joining us with over 20 years of experience shaping the public profiles and reputations of global companies across industries like technology, oil and gas, aerospace, media, and financial services. He's a thought leader in strategic communications and brand management. He's also a former international journalist who's worked with the Wall Street Journal, International Herald Tribune, Bloomberg, and more. And currently he serves as Executive Vice President of Business Development and Marketing for American Solar Rail, where he's driving the future of solar-powered high-speed rail in the U.S. And please welcome to the podcast, Warren Getler. Warren, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me. I look forward to talking with you.
Well, good. Now, your career has taken you from journalism to corporate communications, working across industries that are at the forefront of innovation and change. But let's start with your journalism days. You covered everything from the Thatcher government to energy and defense for some of the most respected outlets in the world. What drew you to journalism, and how did it prepare you for your work in corporate communications?
Right. I was always fascinated by journalism because my father was a journalist with the Washington Post for many years, and he just set a great example and for an exciting life that was always learning, a life of learning and education and curiosity. So I pursued that myself. After I went to Princeton, I went overseas and started on a project there with the Herald Tribune, and they hired me, and it was a great start. I started with some German background that I had in Germany, covering the Helmut Kohl government and German companies. Everybody knows them, VW, Daimler-Benz, BMW, and whatnot. And then I went over to the UK and covered Thatcher and her aerospace companies, British Oil, British Petroleum, as it is known today. And basically got a good sense of where the world is going with some of the mega trends. And after my career in journalism, I said, maybe I can be of some support to companies looking how to communicate best with their shareholders, their stakeholders in general, and move things along.
Well, I have to, ask you about your work in the UK, because journalism in the UK is a little different than it is in the US.
It is. The British are fabulous journalists, some of the best in the world. There's a British invasion now, as you know, running a lot of American media. The style is a little bit different. I think American journalists in one area are tougher on one demand, which is to have your sources identified. The Brits will go with unnamed sources more than the Americans. I learned that lesson, but they're very brilliant with their style of writing and their investigations. It's respected. You see British heads of editorial staffs and publishers now at the Wall Street Journal, at the Washington Post, and other organizations.
What prompted the transition to corporate communications?
Well, a number of things. I had a good run in journalism, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Herald Tribune, Discovery Channel. And I decided that, the pace was pretty brutal at some point, and I decided to go into becoming an entrepreneur first. And I helped launch a company called Witten Technologies. We imaged the underground, and then another company called Map Network. We wound up selling Map Network to Navtech for like 40 million years ago, and that was exciting, running a venture-backed firm.
When you sold that, if I've done my research correctly, you sold it. It sold a year later for a lot more money, did it not?
Yeah.
Do you look back and say, "Wait a minute, we sold
Yeah.
that too soon"?
Right. That was a great question, Rick. It was a group of four of us in DC, and we knew that digital transformation was coming. So we started with digital maps that could go on your phone, your cell phone. And that's what, we're proud of that fact that we got the maps on the cell phone. And we were asking ourselves, do we keep going and building our revenue base, for a bigger multiple, or do we sell? And we knew that Microsoft was coming out with its maps, and Google Maps and Apple and whatnot. And we decided to take the first offer, which was from Navtech. They bought us for $38 million in 2005. But we did make a decision to take the bird in the hand at that point.
Makes sense. Uh, they said nobody ever goes broke taking a profit, right?
There you go.
Yeah, Warren Getler is our guest on the Idea People. You've managed crisis communications for Fortune 100 companies and startups. Crisis management is one of the, needless to say, one of the most high pressure aspects of communications. Can you share an example of a crisis that you navigated and the lessons that you learned from it?
Well, there are quite a few. The truth is about crisis communications, especially coming from large newspapers, is to be candid, transparent, truthful. You have to build the trust factor with your team, your CEO, your C-suite, and let them know that the best way to deal with the crisis is to be as forthcoming as possible. Deflect questions you really do not want to answer. You maybe deal with your attorneys or whatever it might be. But when it comes to the paper, when they're asking direct questions, you hopefully have a relationship with those journalists to begin with. That's a good way to start. If you're an in-house CorpCom guy, you should have relationships with your local journalists, TV, print, and whatnot, and nationals. And there have been quite a few that I can share. One time we were working, I was working in actually in the oil industry, and they were getting gouged for price gouging. They're getting criticized for price gouging, and the price was 140 some a barrel. And so the idea there was to get across the value of oil and gas in people's lives beyond just the pump, meaning, there's oil and gas that goes in your kids' soccer balls and whatnot, the byproducts and whatnot. So we came out with a campaign there called energytomorrow.org, which was pretty interesting. And I've transitioned from doing that to my own, the company I'm working with right now is solar powered, the green transformation. So basically the idea is deal fairly, deal authoritatively, get the facts out. Don't try and stiff arm the media when they're asking tough questions. I work for Michael Saylor, who's now he's been the head of MicroStrategy for a long time, but he has the biggest corporate holding of Bitcoin right now. He's in the news all the time. And at one point, I was his head of corp comms here in the DC area, and he was getting beaten up in the press for partying too much and being on his yacht too much. And the shareholders were saying, get back on your yacht. And they were saying this on MSNBC. And the strategic investors were saying so. And so I sat Mike down. I said, Mike, we really got to get real here. Let's deal with it. Let's get back to addressing the needs of, the stakeholders in the company and party less. And he said, yeah, I guess it better be a better Boy Scout these days. And look where he is now. So we were very open to the questions coming in. We laid out a Q&A about how to respond. And I think proactively is the best way to go.
Proactive, and I think, and you have to remind your clients, as we do here, to not do your best to not be defensive. And it's hard, like you said, when they're being peppered like that.
I think that's the truth. Not sound evasive, not sound defensive, but to say, look, okay, we screwed up, or it's not exactly like you guys think it is. Here are the details. Bring in third parties that can attest to the issue, not just yourselves sounding defensive. And deal with it. It's an issue for somebody. So let's talk about some cases where it did not go well. I wasn't necessarily directly involved with these, but Volkswagen had a huge crisis with the vehicle passing the carburetor issue and whatnot. So they forestalled and they put off. BP did the same thing with their disasters on land and in the Gulf of Mexico with their environmental piece. So there are a couple of cases where they should have taken a more interactive, proactive, less defensive approach. And it came back to bite them very badly when they were defensive, to your point.
You've also led communications for CEOs and C-suite executives. How do you approach leadership communication, especially in high-stakes environments?
Well, you want to get in the head of your leader, right? Some are shy, press shy, and others are maybe too out there. So you want to strike a medium and get into their mindset, because once you understand how they think, they can be incredibly dynamic, not just for the sake of the company, but thought leadership, as we call it. So being seen as a leader to respond to issues coming out of industry or predicting where things are going in the future. And so my thought to get press for CEOs is identify where you sit in the trend and speak to the trends. You'll get 6 paragraphs in a Wall Street Journal story about the trend, rather than just write about us or just write about me. And most intelligent CEOs, men, women, they understand how to be broader than just what service or product their company provides to the world. They understand that to be really respected, you want to be seen as, may I use the example of Steve Jobs of the digital world or the mobile world, so to speak.
Yeah, you mentioned relationships with media, and I have to remind folks often that I could spend hours having dinner and lunch with somebody, but if the story doesn't grab them, they're not going to do me any special favors. Is that hard sometimes to remind a client that it's not as simple as me making a phone call? We have to give them something that they're going to find compelling.
Definitely. I think the pitch these days is so crucial. The channel that you use, whether it's LinkedIn or you tweet with them or whatever it may be, it's no longer the phone call and the email. You really have to capture, why should I be spending time with you and your CEO? That's so important. So the best advice I can give to the PR folks, Stratcoms, Corpcoms, Crisis Comms, is to really understand the journalists that you're working with, know their beat, know what they're working on, know their pace, know when to call them, what time, and stress that you have something super important to talk about, something new, something innovative, something that's going to go fast and break things, as they say among the tech bros. But, if you pitch them about AI these days, their eyes are going to glaze over, So it's good that you have a very unique angle, a hook, as we all call it, to capture their attention.
What advice would you give someone aspiring to work in corporate communications or PR?
Great question. It's changed. Be prepared for disappointment. Be prepared for not being able to secure the story that would have come in a day or two. For months or weeks, there's a long lead time. Be prepared for people completely ghosting you or ignoring you. So do your homework, know what the value of the story is for a particular publication or TV channel, whatever it is. Develop relationships. We all have to network. That's the key thing. You have to get out there and take them for a coffee, if not a lunch. We used to take journalists out for lunch and pay for it. But now, go out to Starbucks, whatever it may be, and grab a coffee, develop the relationships, and understand what they're really interested in. Another thing that I would recommend is only pitch to the most authoritative journalists. The best pieces you can get are working with a journalist who understands the entire picture of the product you're pushing or the service in the context of the industry, because then they can compare it and make a better analysis of where you fit in. Now, as far as if you're doing PR for a government official, I think trust, again, is the most important thing, that you're not dealing with spin. You're going to get an honest, interactive interview with your client. And when you're speaking to the journalist, that the client is prepared, the mayor, whoever it may be, to meet with you one-on-one and deal frankly and forthrightly with the issue.
We're talking with Warren Getler on the idea people. For those who may be facing their first big crisis, what would your advice be?
Which crisis? Tell me what you mean.
Any big crisis that might, I guess, make a company feel like, this could be what brings us down.
Okay, so I'm a big believer, having been an investigative journalist, in preparation, and you have to be prepared for crisis. You have to actually engage in tabletop exercises. A lot of the healthcare companies were hit with cyber breaches that were devastating, and they didn't know what to do, where PPI was released to the public. So you have to bring in a team to prepare for crisis. So in the case of cyber preparation, you have your CTO, Chief Technology Officer, CIO. You have your risk compliance folks. You have your CEO and your CFO. And then you come in as head of Corp Comms and Crisis Comms, and you actually walk through a tabletop exercise where things could go right or things could go wrong, and you have Q&As, and you have talking points where if the crisis were to emerge, this is the identified speaker, this is what we're going to say, and this is our attitude, which is proactive and candid and truthful as much as possible.
I'm thinking what it would have been like to be a fly on the wall in the comms departments for for both the Democratic and Republican Party during this past election. I mean, the news cycles were incredible.
News cycles were absolutely incredible in this brutal campaign, this brutal election season. And I think both sides made mistakes, but in the end, what's a mistake in this world, right? Is it a mistake? It's just rolling with it. And I guess resilience, the ability to bounce back, is important. You could get into the nitty gritty that both sides, where they were very successful and where they failed, and what audiences were they trying to get. And one of the biggest pieces here, Rick, is social media, right? So social media played a huge role. Rogan to everybody else, Rogan and Musk on one side, and, except 20 different other sources on the Democrat side. And, you can't control social media. You really can't, but you can figure out how to respond to it.
Tell us about your efforts in trying to improve our solar transportation.
Right. Well, solar is a fascinating topic. It's going to be challenged. There are going to be more milestones now with Trump coming into power, because he's not a believer in the green revolution or green tech or climate tech. He's actually a proponent, as we all know, drill baby drill, oil and gas. But I think solar will have a future globally and in the United States, places like California, especially. We were talking to California High-Speed Rail, and we're talking to them about solar, and now they're moving into the solar power generation phase, which is very exciting. Solar rail is exciting for us because, for instance, Holland set the example with wind power. 700,000 Dutch folks are transported by train that is powered by wind power in Holland. So that's fascinating. So we think with our solar potential, our idea is to have a train that would run from Savannah all the way to LA, solar powered. The solar panels are not those on the trains, but are on the solar farms abutting the right of way where we hope the trains will run through the interstate rights of way. Yeah,
it is fascinating. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on The Idea People. Now, your experience and perspective are nothing short of inspiring. We appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners are going to be walking away with a wealth of insights into strategic communications, leadership, and of course, innovation. Before we wrap it up, though, we want to get one final takeaway from you. And what's the one principle or piece of advice that's guided you throughout your career, something that you've always kind of hung your hat on?
Curiosity. I think always be curious, always learn as much as you can.
That's the journalist in you.
Yeah.
Curiosity.
Be curious, and teamwork. Teamwork always helps. Never burn bridges. Always acknowledge your weaknesses, bring together the best teams that you can to fill the gaps. I learned that as a young soccer player, that we had a great team. We traveled the world and we all brought different things to the table. Embrace diversity, embrace community, because we're much stronger as a team. I think Los Angeles has a lot going for it right now, to tell you the truth. I think it's a city that's based on a very strong complex of communities and immigrant families and generations. And I'm very confident, hats off to the Dodgers for a great World Series.
Oh my goodness, yes. And what position did you play in soccer, Warren?
I was a striker. I was up front.
So you did all the goal scoring.
I did a lot of goal scoring and assisting. In college, I was recruited. I didn't play much. I had no playing time. I sat on the bench. But my mentor, interesting little sidebar, was Bob Bradley, who was the LA Fire's coach out in LA, and he's gone on to great things. So, like I said, truthfulness, community, innovation, curiosity. Those are qualities that I think will get you somewhere.
No, we appreciate that. Thank you for joining us, Warren Getler, our guest on The Idea People. If you want more information about Lee Andrews Group, check out leeandrewsgroup.com. And that's a wrap on this episode of The Idea People. And thank you so much for listening.
Okay, the podcast set up downtown. We got motion for the idea people. The conversation's open. Lee Andrews Group, the firm. Yeah, we here now. Let's talk about great ideas. Have a sit. We on a mission. You get the idea, people. Glad you pulled up. How you doing? Nice to meet you.